Now today's topic is Swami Vivekananda and East-West dialogue. The encounter between the Occidental and Oriental cultural and civilizational traditions. Any student of world history will be fascinated by this topic, because if you look at the history and evolution of an encounter between the Occidental and Oriental civilizations, you have to begin with the early 6th or 7th century BC. It is said that the Oriental cultural tradition, not necessarily spiritual tradition or religious tradition, but cultural and philosophical traditions, had their influence in ancient Alexandria and in later centuries in Damascus also. So there was a close intellectual encounter between the northwestern regions of India, like today's Punjab, Haryana, today's Afghanistan, which was culturally part of India till about 100 years back. If these regions and Alexandria, and through Alexandria, right up to Athens, in Greek city-states. In the writings and in the philosophical ideas of 7th century Greek thinker Thales, who thought that water is the fundamental stuff from which this world originates. As we call Brahman in Vedanta, or Atman in Vedanta, Thales believed that water was the primary stuff from which this world originates. So the idea of a single common origin, a fundamental principle from which the world originates, which sustains the world and which is ultimately the point of dissolution of the world, was familiar to ancient Greek thinkers, pre-Socratic thinkers. And in the writings of Socrates and Plato, of course, Plato was the one who interpreted Socrates, you can find the same trend, inquiry into an impersonal principle, not a human being who creates his world, but an impersonal fundamental principle which is behind this universe, which sustains this entire creation. And this continued right up to Aristotle. But from Aristotle time onwards, Greek thoughts started giving more importance to science and mathematics. And in fact, it is Aristotle who is, in a way, the forefather of modern Western or Occidental obsession with science and technology and pragmatism. Now, and even after Aristotle's time, when there was a movement which was a very important post-Socratic movement, it's called Neoplatonism, which was nourished by Philo and later on by Plotinus. You can find the same trend right up to the 4th century Christian theologian philosopher Augustine, who had an Alexandrian connection which enabled him to appreciate the importance of independent philosophy or independent thought, free from the clutches of revealed scriptures or theological shackles. Of course, later on he was condemned and to some extent relegated to a backseat by the later Franciscan monastic tradition in medieval Europe. Now, just started with this encounter in Alexandria, in Greece, and in later centuries, of course, in Damascus. Now, in all these East-West encounters, the central theme was not spirituality, but material sciences. Through Damascus and Alexandria, astrology and astronomy entered European intellectual tradition, especially after the founding of the University of Cordoba by the Arabs, who brought the light of Eastern civilization, Indian and to some extent Chinese civilization into Europe. So all these encounters were taking place at the material plane, not at the spiritual or mystical plane. Now, during the Middle Ages, of course, this encounter came to an end. Theology became the dictator of the intellectual life of Europe throughout the Middle Ages. And then, after the discovery of sea routes towards the Orient, there was another encounter which slowly started emerging. And that encounter was military-political encounter, which did not have anything to do with religion or philosophy. During this time, an effort was made in India in the 16th century, during the period of Akbar the Great, who was the greatest of the Mughal emperors, who was a very broad-minded person, who was highly influenced by the Upanishadic thought tradition, and who also appreciated some of the great teachings of Christianity and non-Islamic religious traditions. So he made an attempt to effect some kind of a bridge, to construct a bridge between the Occidental and Oriental tradition. Here we have to remember, Christianity was perceived to be an Asiatic or Oriental religious tradition till the advent of the Portuguese on the west coast of India. Because there are historical records to prove that there was religious encounter between the Oriental religious cultures and Rome and Christian tradition, even right from 1st century AD onwards. So anyhow, Akbar tried to effect some kind of an interreligious dialogue platform. He built up a platform for interreligious dialogue or East-West dialogue. You can put it in this language as well. And he called it Din Ilahi. But it was an eclectic attempt. He was trying to borrow good ideas, noble ideas from all religious traditions, not based on any spiritual or mystical experience, not based on the fundamental teachings, the fundamental spiritual ideas which constitute the core of our religious traditions, but rather he was just trying to put together some acceptable ideas from all existing religious traditions. So it was a failure. Then in the 17th century, just about a century later, a Jesuit priest, his name was De Nobili, he tried to establish a platform for East-West dialogue on religious plane, but his attempt was turned down by the Franciscans in Rome. So he could not succeed much. Then in the 19th century, the first real effort was made by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who was born in 1774 and passed away maybe in 1833-34. He was a well-educated man, more or less a self-made man, who had intimate understanding first-hand understanding of the teachings of not only his own religion, Hinduism, but also of Islam, Sufism, Christian religious tradition, and many other religious traditions. So he made an attempt to build a platform for East-West dialogue in India. And Brahma Samaj was the result of this effort, which he founded in 1828. But it did not take off because it was perceived to be an attempt to Westernize or Christianize Hinduism by Hindu Orthodox circles. Whatever may be the reason, he was far ahead of his times. But one fundamental flaw in all these attempts was that the person or the leader who tried to establish an East-West dialogue, an encounter between the Occidental and Oriental religious traditions, did not have the background of inner experience of any of these religious traditions. That was one flaw. Now, in 19th century, from another angle, a real effort was launched and it became a success, and that culminated in the advent of Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna was born in 1836 when the East India Company was still ruling India, when the Anglican missionaries were trying to convert the students of presidency institutions into Anglican Church or Unitarian Church. Now, Sri Ramakrishna was in fact the one who launched this new effort to establish an East-West dialogue, a solid platform built on spiritual experience to establish an active inter-religious dialogue or East-West dialogue, because his main platform was his own inner experience. Through Advaita sadhana, he reached the highest intuitive spiritual experience. And with that mind, he practiced other non-Advaitic religious practices of Hinduism and also other religious traditions like Islam, Christianity, and all other important religious traditions of those times. And he found out that the goal is one, but means may be different. This is an ancient Vedic dictum. In Rigveda Samhita, there is a famous verse, Indram Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Atho Divyasa Suparna Viruddhe Ekam Sat Vipra Bagudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. This is the mantra. So, Indram Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Atho Divyasa Suparna Viruddhe means Indra, Mitra, Varuna. These are different names of different godheads, different deities. These are different names, different attempts to reach the supreme goal. Goal is one, reality is one. So the Ekam Sat. Sat means the absolute reality. It is one. But wise men call it by different names. And this he taught not on the basis of any dogma or doctrine or philosophical ideas, but on the basis of his own inner experience. But he was not exposed to modern education. He was not what you call a modern person. But he was, in a way, the embodiment of all the spiritual traditions which India as a nation embodied for 5,000 years. But Sri Ramakrishna could not interact with the modern Western world. For that, he got a disciple, Swami Vivekananda. Now, Swami Vivekananda was eminently qualified to act as a bridge between the East and the West. On the one hand, he had a spiritual training under Sri Ramakrishna, who was the condensation of India's spiritual heritage, which it has accumulated for 5,000 years. And Vivekananda was eminently qualified because he had imbibed the best of Western Occidental cultural tradition. If you read the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, you find him referring to Kant, Hegel, Spinoza, Schopenhauer. Their works were taught in Indian universities at that time. And also, he refers to even the latest 19th century socio-political ideas like socialism, communism, Darwinism, neo-positivism, and also the idealistic philosophical traditions of Europe, Kant, Hegel, and so on. And along with that, he was a very realistic man. He was not just a mystic or a prophet. If he were just a mystic or a prophet who was not introduced or exposed to modern Western cultural traditions, he would not be able to act as a bridge, because a bridge serves the purpose of going from one bank to the other bank. So on the one hand, he was eminently qualified in the sense that he had imbibed the best of Western intellectual tradition that 19th century Europe could offer. So some of his teachers said about him, British teachers, professors teaching in Scottish Church College, which was established by Scottish Church Mission, and also Presidency College, where most of his professors were Englishmen, Europeans, Irishmen. They said, even in German universities, we have not come across a student as astute as Vivekananda. This is the opinion given by European professors who were familiar with the European philosophical traditions and the latest socio-political theories of Europe, who were familiar with the works of Marx and Engels, Darwin and others. And again, he was steeped in European history. If you read complete works, you'll be surprised. See, I am a socialist, he says, not because it's a perfect system, but because half a loaf is better than no bread. If a communist will be jealous of this statement. These words are coming from a monk, from a religious teacher, from a mystic, not from a revolutionary. He says, I am a socialist, not because it's a perfect system, but because half a loaf is better than no bread. In another context, he says, you'll be surprised, every orthodoxy has a sacred duty to perform. You know that the duty? To dig its own grave. That's the revolutionary speaking in front of you. And the longer it delays it, the worse death it will die. Every orthodoxy has a sacred duty to perform, namely to dig its own grave, if it doesn't change. Now, just imagine the humanism behind, the revolutionary spirit behind. Unless you have read the history of French Revolution and maybe the history of American independence struggle, you won't be able to fully appreciate the importance of these words. And now, along with that, he had also imbibed the best of India's spiritual heritage. One source of his information was his own education in Sanskrit language, in Indian religious scriptures. And being equipped with all this, he traveled all over India and encountered people belonging to different walks of life, kings, scholars, sometimes beggars, people belonging to all walks of life, not only the so-called elites. No, he understood the real problem of the Orient. In a way, it was not peculiar to India, it was peculiar to the Orient. He found out one problem. See, India or the Orient had specialized in spiritual and religious traditions. You look at India's history, you find in the Vedic literature, in the Puranic literature, you can come across hundreds of saints and sages like Buddha or Jesus or Shankara and so on. Not dozens, hundreds. And India is the cradle of world religious culture. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and so many other religious traditions. Because India had given freedom in religious matters. You can believe in whichever God you want to. And you can worship any way you like. Nobody will question you. So, in religious and spiritual matters, the Orient, the East, had given full freedom, full liberty. You know, French Revolution slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, all these were quite practiced in religious realm, spiritual realm in Indian history. But there was no freedom in social matters. I shall give an example. You see, in 51 AD, the first Jewish migration took place. Almost, I think that was the first destruction of the ancient Jewish synagogue in Jerusalem. The second migration took place in 70 AD. That was the time when Masada was conquered by the Roman legions. The 10th legion marched towards Judah, and Masada, the last stronghold of the Jewish community, was conquered. The entire Jewish garrison committed suicide. Second even. At that time also, the Jews who were moving around in the Judah, in the neighboring regions, migrated to India. And now, 1 or 2 years later, the first Christian migration took place, 52 or 54 AD. And in 6th century, maybe just a few years after the passing away of Prophet Muhammad, the first Muslim Arabs also came to India. And you know how Hinduism, how India's spiritual heritage received them. Well, we shall give you this temple, you can go and worship. Whatever. They didn't know anything about Judaism, Christianity or Islam. The Hindu Rajas did not know. They believed that, well, these people worship God in a different way. All right, let them do that. They were not exponents of the ideals of inter-religious dialogue. They didn't know anything about other religions. They believed, well, these people are also spiritual seekers. Let them worship their God in their own way. They were given full freedom. So in spiritual and religious matters, the East had granted full freedom and liberty and equality for everyone. But in social matters, the picture was different. There were shackles, there were chains, and there were all kinds of social injustices in the name of casteism and many other aspects. So Swamiji discovered this. In spiritual matters, India had practiced, rather East had practiced liberty and equality. But in social matters, it did not. So religion and spirituality grew. Freedom is the first condition of growth. So Vivekananda's statement is there. When you get freedom, you grow. If you don't get freedom, you try to become a lion. If you fail, then you become a fox, that's all. So what happened in the West? In the West, there was complete freedom in social matters. Egalitarian spirit. Especially after the French Revolution, even British Parliament started thinking loudly about introducing new amendments in British Parliament to prevent the possibility of a revolution in Britain, especially after the teachings of Karl Marx and Engels became well known all over Europe. They wanted to prevent the possibility of a revolution. It took place in far-off Russia. Marx never imagined that. Marx expected a revolution will take place in a highly industrialized society, maybe in Germany or in Britain or France. But it happened in Soviet Union, in Russia, because there was no freedom. So the West exercised freedom, liberty, equality and fraternity because of Industrial Revolution, because of the discovery of sea routes and the gradual expansion and growth of neo-rich classes, trading classes all over European countries, and also due to the great event that is French Revolution, which was an eye-opener for all European nations. So that shook them out of their slumber, and they tried to eradicate social and cultural inequalities. And so when Vivekananda arrived in America in 1893, he was surprised to find that in American society there was perfect freedom in all social matters. People were free to practice, to follow whatever social customs they wanted. Now, in Europe, it was different, because Europe had witnessed so many wars and bloody episodes in the name of religion, in the name of God. People fought and killed each other on behalf of God and in the name of religion, because there was no freedom in religious and spiritual matters. Maybe not now, I'm not talking about the present condition during the Middle Ages or till about the end of 18th century. Inquisition, burning at stake, massacres, genocides, all in the name of following another cult or reading Bible in a different way. There was no freedom in religious and spiritual matters. So Swamiji wanted to synthesize the best of the East, that is spiritual heritage and spiritual freedom, with the best of the West, freedom in social matters, and also their scientific and technological spirit. Now, freedom given in social matters naturally gave energy to people. Naturally, they felt free to make use of their intelligence, the innovative spirit. So new sea routes were discovered, new scientific and technological inventions were made, discoveries were made, new experiments were made. So any new idea is welcome, and people are eager to put that into practice. They are willing to experiment with that new idea in Europe and America, much more than in Asiatic nations. Even today you find Asian industrialized nations are very good at improvisation, but they are not as good in inventiveness or in innovation. This is the background behind. So Swamiji wanted to synthesize, blend together, harmonize these two cultural traditions. I mean, the best of the East and the best of the West, he wanted to put together. Is it possible? Somebody may ask this question. Can we evolve a nation with all the merits of the East and West, devoid of all the demerits? The conservatism, the obscurantism, the backward-looking attitude, the orthodoxy of the East should be avoided. At the same time, the worldly result orientation, the spiritual bankruptcy of the West also should be avoided. The dynamism, energy, and open spirit of the West should be blended with the spiritual freedom, spiritual sensitivity of the East. That was Swamiji's dream. In fact, this was the central theme of Swamiji's concept of an ideal nation, an ideal society, an ideal man, and also this formed the very core of his philosophy of education. When he defined his plan, he said, what we need today is the harmonious blending of the best of the Occidental, namely their inventiveness, their organization skill, their leadership skills, their work ethic, discipline and patriotism, and our own traditional spiritual values. This was his own definition. In fact, this sentence was quoted by many prominent educationists in India, by Dr. Kothari, by Dr. Adhakshan, who was the leader, who led the first education commission in India after Indian independence. Dr. Kothari's commission is still commission report is still being studied and taught in universities in India. A blending or harmony or synthesis of the best of the Oriental with the best of the Occidental. Now, to understand the significance of Vivekananda's contribution, we had to have a look at what is happening in our own times. Today, you find there are three attitudes towards East-West encounter. One attitude is purely exclusivistic, defensive. Now, many theologians of the old school who still hold fast to the old dogmas try to reject the Eastern, the Oriental cultural or spiritual tradition as pagan, as something to be avoided. This is one view, but this view is not very popular among educated people either in Europe or America. This view is held by a small fringe group who are not very popular among the educated circles of either America or European countries. This is one attitude. The second attitude is called syncretistic, where, disgusted with the blood-stained history of the church during the Middle Ages, people reject all that belongs to the great spiritual tradition of Jesus Christ. And what they do, they surrender everything and they are eager to follow, blindly imitate and follow whatever comes in the name of religion from the Orient. This is the second attitude. This is also very unhealthy because every religious tradition has the spiritual core as its essence. If something undesirable happened in its history, it's not because of the prophet or the teacher, but because the people who tried to practice it the wrong way or preach it the wrong way. Therefore, the attitude of complete rejection of the Western spiritual tradition is not a very desirable one. But we have to remember, when we talk about the Oriental, we have to remember Swami Vivekananda said Jesus was the Oriental of the Oriental, because Jesus was born in the Asia after all. But his teachings inspired innumerable great saints, mystics, and spiritual seekers all over Europe, in countries, and also later on in America during the subsequent centuries. So that should be kept in mind. Every religious tradition has this spiritual content as its inner core. That should not be rejected. So blind imitation of anything that comes from the Orient is as suicidal as complete rejection. The third alternative is dialogical. You accept, you receive whatever is necessary, whatever is healthy for our society, and avoid the rest. This is based on synthesis and harmony. And the credit for introducing this new concept of interaction, new concept in interacting with other religious traditions should go to Swami Vivekananda. Because even when he was preaching Vedanta, even when he was preaching Hindu spiritual tradition, Swamiji was reminding the Western people of the spiritual greatness of Jesus Christ and the religious traditions which prevailed in European countries, in America. The true spiritual teachings. In the name of religion, in the name of spiritual ideas, people built prison walls of book, theology, faith, conventions, rituals, priestcraft, dogmas, doctrines, and so on. They should be rejected. But the spiritual essence of the religious tradition should be upheld. This is a very healthy attitude. And this attitude, this approach is built upon the twin concepts of synthesis and harmony. It is not artificially putting together ideas from different religions. Rather, it is the idea of integrating the spiritual ideas existing in all religious traditions on the basis of one single truth. Experience is the criterion of religion and spirituality. At the experience level, there is no distinction between religion and religion. In fact, this is very important. Swamiji says in one context, there are 4 levels of evolution in spiritual life. The first one is ritual, very gross, at the gross level. There can be no East-West dialogue or encounter at this level, because every religion is different from every other religion when it comes to ritual. Mythology. There could be some common factors in different religious traditions, mythological ideas. You have got, Homer wrote Iliad, Valmiki wrote Ramayana. There are many common things. Of course, the inner idea, the spiritual essence is entirely different. I won't go into details about this at this time. Now, and so, at the level of rituals, there can be no harmony. And even at the level of mythology, there cannot be any synthesis or harmony. When it comes to philosophy, there could be many common philosophical, metaphysical ideas in all religious traditions. But there cannot be perfect harmony and synthesis. But there is perfect harmony and synthesis when it comes to experience. And all the great religious teachers were men or women of experience. Now, Swami Vivekananda's Guru Sri Ramakrishna first had this experience, and on the solid rock of his own inner experience, he built up this edifice of East-West dialogue. Because when it comes to experience, all religions are speaking about the same truth. Language may be different, methods may be different. So, when Vivekananda interpreted ancient India's spiritual tradition in a language and idiom which was intelligible to Western people, and emphasized the fact at the level of experience, all the diversities, all the differences vanish. Differences which exist at the level of rituals and mythologies vanish. Because experience has got only one language, and that language is the language of silence, and all great mystics spoke that language, whether St. Francis of Assisi or the great Shuka of India's spiritual heritage. Everywhere you find, they speak the same language, the language of silence. Now, it is this synthesis, this harmony, this blending of the best of the Occidental with the best of the Oriental. That constitutes the very core of Swamiji's philosophy of an ideal nation, his ideal of evolving an ideal society, and also his philosophy of education. It is the basis for an ideal man to grow, for an ideal society to evolve, and for an ideal nation to exist and function. Now, in this context, if you look at the history of, I've already tried to give a graphic outline of the evolution of the concept of East-West encounter, and also the history of the encounter between the culture, the tradition, spirituality and religion of the East with those of the West. There was a great poet, British poet, he said, East is East, West is West, and never meet. This is these are words from a poet, an English poet. Swami Vivekananda seems to have been born to disprove this, to repudiate this idea, because he proved that East and West could not only meet, but could also learn from each other, can coexist, because every nation, just as every individual, has something to contribute to this world. Every nation, every society also. We have what every nation has its own area of specialization. It is not necessarily its choice. It is determined by the geographical factors, climatical factors, food habits, even weather conditions. So naturally, every nation evolves around its own genius. So also every individual and also every society. But in modern times, it is possible to establish an encounter, establish a bridge, a dialogue between the East and West, not only on the plane of science and technology, cultural values, but also on the plane of spiritual values. So I have just tried to give a brief outline. In his complete work, Swamiji speaks about the evolution of Western ethics, Western values, right from the period of Greek city-states. The organization skill which Swamiji referred to, I already referred to here. So the 300 Spartans showing the organization skill in stopping the Persian hordes coming to us at the Battle of Thermopylae. You have all these stories. Right? And the superior leadership skill, the efficiency, the organization skill, the work ethic, the coordination, the team spirit, all these which characterize the Western cultural ethos, which they got from the Greeks and later from the Romans, and also which later were enriched and diversified during the post-industrial revolution era. So all these values can be imbibed with the cultural and spiritual values of the Orient. But very often there is a trend in the other direction. Many people try to synthesize the negative elements of the East and West with disastrous consequences. Swamiji wanted us to blend, synthesize, harmonize together the best of the East and the best of the West. Many people, when they tried to follow the first method, I already explained this exclusivistic method, rejecting whatever belongs to another culture. Many such people try to limit their world to their own little selves. Then there are many people who blindly follow the ways of the West or East. So somebody, a modern sociologist referring to this said, it is the path leading to cultural suicide. Because every nation, as I said, has its own genius, its own merits, its own positive factors, which it has evolved over the centuries. It should consolidate that. But along with that, it may also have evolved certain negative, undesirable trends that should be avoided. So, East could enrich itself by learning the organization, the efficiency, the dynamism of the West, and the West also could enrich itself by imbibing the spiritual values, the cultural values of the East. Because the question, who am I? What's the meaning of this life? What's the origin of the universe? These questions were sincerely asked and answered only in the East. These questions were asked in the West, but reply came immediately. God sat one fine morning, created this world, and said, you do this, you people do this, you people do that. This answer leads to conflicts and confrontations. On the other hand, the East discovered the supreme truth. The reality, the divine spirit, is immanent in all beings. It is also omnipresent, all-pervading, and it is also transcendental. So this leads to a kind of spiritual humanism. The West only developed positivism and humanism. Catholic humanism, later socialist humanism, scientific humanism, but all based on how to live a better life in this world. The question, what's the meaning of life, was never answered. The East, on the other hand, neglected many of the material realities of life in this world and was obsessed with the fundamental metaphysical questions. So the East should learn from the West on the material plane, and the West should learn from the East on the spiritual plane. This was the core of Swami Vivekananda's concept of the synthesis between the East and West. It is a very elaborate topic. We need a lot of time and discussion to do full justice to the subject. I have just tried to give an outline within a very short time span. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Namastu. Om Peace, Peace, Peace.